All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to today's 12 Points June webinar, Managing Student Loans and Other Debt. My name is Dan Sharkey, and I'm a Senior Relationship Manager here at 12 Points. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to mainly focus today on student debt and other consumer debt, but we're really going to make it a conversation about how you should be thinking about debt in all forms and what you can be doing now to ensure that you're well positioned as you move forward. Okay, so before we really get started, I know we have parents of college age kids and high school age kids and with children of any age. What I want to start talking about before we get into the actual managing of the student debt process is how I spend a couple of minutes on how we all should be thinking about student debt before it actually goes into effect. We have a lot of conversations here at 12 Points with clients whose students are entering their junior or senior year of high school, have identified their quote unquote dream school, and are trying to determine the best ways to pay for it. What I would encourage all of you to do, and we've talked about this on previous webinars, both in March and May, around budgeting and the student loan and college process. But what I would encourage everyone to do is to really engage your children in this process earlier. A key component of managing student debt later on in life, which we will discuss on, and which is the meat of this presentation, is really understanding what it is that is owed, how you can go about attacking it, and what your responsibilities are as a borrower. That conversation is a lot easier to have when your child is a freshman and sophomore, as they prepare to enter the college process, as they prepare to go on their college tours and all those other types of activities, as they prepare themselves for the next chapter in their academic life. But the financial component should not be ignored, nor should children be sheltered from it. They are ultimately going to be the ones responsible for this debt once they are out of college or out of university. So it's important that they fully understand what they're getting themselves into beforehand and help them make the educated decisions necessary to ensure that they find themselves in the best possible place upon graduation. So how does that look like? So how does that work? What does that look like? Whenever we engage either our clients or those who have come to us to help with this question, the most important part, as I mentioned, is getting your child engaged early on the process and making sure that they are a key component of determining what is appropriate for their financial future. One example would be, depending upon the area of study that your child would like to spend their 4 years focusing on, is to ask them, what will your salary be upon graduation? Do you plan to live at home? Do you plan to live on your own? What will your rent be? What will your other expenses be? How much will your debt service be on your student loans? Can you afford to live on your own? That is an exercise in really allowing them to understand what burden they'll be taking on. We're based in Boston, obviously. Some of the finest academic institutions in the world are located right here in our fair city. They also come with a very steep price tag. Boston College, Boston University, Northeastern, all private, all very expensive. If you're going to pursue a career that has lower salary targets than others, it is important to know what debt burden that you're actually undertaking and what you can do to minimize that. So that is a very, very key component, because you wouldn't believe the amount of conversations we have and the sticker shock once students are out of college and realize what they're burdened with for the next 2 decades. So it's important to begin that process early. Total cost. What are you doing from a tuition standpoint? But then what is the actual, for every dollar borrowed, what dollar will be paid back? Usually students and parents alike see the sticker price in today's current dollars, but they fail to truly compute what the interest will be later on. So understanding what the total cost is now is really helpful. What are the financial benefit of other options? Anyone who is more interested in this topic, please reach out and we can get into it a little bit further. And I would refer you back to our March webinar. But there are, being strategic about which schools you're applying to could be helpful. But it's important to understand what other financial options are out there throughout the college selection process. And then most importantly, and this is probably directed more to our parents and those who are currently listening and will be listening on demand, what happens to your financial plan when your children are saddled with student debt? Do they have to move back home? Does that interrupt your relocation plans? Do you have to work longer? Does your retirement have to be postponed? All of these different things need to be considered when you are planning for college, and when you are developing a plan for attacking student debt following graduation. Okay, so that's just a little primer. Again, we talked more about this in the March webinar, so I would encourage anyone who has further questions about this particular slice to download that and have a listen. We also had a consultant on as well, who I think could be very informative. But now let's get into attacking student debt when it actually becomes a reality. You have to start with the basics, and that is, broadly speaking, what is your interest rate? What are the terms? Terms defined as, are there any prepayment penalties? Are there any forbearance questions? Are there deferment options? How long is the term of the note? All those different types of things are very, very important, and they vary significantly from the type of lender that you utilize. A lot of parents, when they're first entering the process, utilize government loans, which can have far more flexibility in their loan terms, but tend to also carry a higher interest rate. Private loans have far more limited options in terms of their favorability to lenders, but their interest rate tends to be better. So you need to understand what exactly it is that you're signing up for, what exactly you'll be responsible for, and what options are at your disposal. Are there any types of deferment options if you lose your job, or if your salary gets cut, or if you have a child? All of these different kind of things need to be addressed ahead of time, and you need to fully understand the terms of your document. No one wants to read a 30 or 40 page disclosure form, but it is vital to understand what you're actually signing up for. More importantly, and this is the part that I think most people fall a little bit short on, is understanding what the total amount owed will be. If you borrowed $20,000 at a 7% rate of interest, pay back over a 20-year period, you're paying back significantly more over a period of time. That sounds very obvious to state out loud, but oftentimes students especially do not understand what they're ultimately responsible for. Understanding what the total debt service is helps you make better and more educated decisions, and at least allows you to make your decisions with intention, which is really all that we can ask for. So once the student once the individual has student debt, how can you actually address this issue? So there are a handful of strategies that we would recommend, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of them right here, specifically interest rate, consolidation, and waterfall. And I'm going to go into each one individually to kind of highlight the benefits, the pros and cons of each, and talk about what you can do as a borrower to really impact yourself going forward. So when you're thinking about repaying student loans, most people have more than one. Whether it be for books, tuition, room and board, usually student loans are layered and they come in multiple forms, either from private lenders or from government entities. The best way to attack a situation in which you have multiple loans is simply to pay the highest interest rate first, regardless of balance. So if you have a loan at 6% and one at 3%, regardless of what the balance is in each, if you're going to try and prepay or pay anything above the minimum, we always recommend that you start with the highest interest rate. This lessens your debt service over time. You pay less out of pocket than you would otherwise under any other strategy. Now, where does this method fall short? In the example in which you have a low interest rate loan, but it has a very, very high balance, it at times can feel like you're throwing a deck chair off the Queen Mary. You're chipping away, and it becomes very, very tempting to see loans disappear from your ledger, as opposed to just paying the largest one first, if that also happens to carry the highest interest rate. We would urge you to fight that urge. What you really want to do is ensure that as a borrower that you pay the least amount of interest possible, and that means paying the highest interest rate first. Again, we talked about at the very onset of this section that understanding the terms of your loan are vitally important. Ensuring that there's no prepayment penalties, ensuring that there's no other late charges or any other fees associated with that you be responsible for that you do so unknowingly. Ensuring that you have a well a clear understanding of what you're doing when you're borrowing is critical to having success later on. Consolidation. There is one caveat to this that we'll touch on later specifically, but this is a great tool if you have those multiple loans that we discussed earlier. A lot of people, as I mentioned, cannot borrow for the entire length of a four-year college education with one loan, whether it's because of a lumpy tuition payment schedule or the fact that there are unintended expenses or additional fees that may not have been accounted for at the time. Well, most of the time, if you're borrowing a large amount of your tuition bill, they're going to come in the form of multiple loans. There are a lot of options out there that allow you to take all those different loans and consolidate them into one single payment. I think this is a great option, but it's not without its shortcomings. So, as I mentioned, you can generally do this to consolidate from an administrative standpoint all the different loans you have to pay, but you can also usually do this to consolidate an interest rate to a much lower rate than you'd currently be paying. A lot of institutions that offer this, there's also strings attached. You may need to open up a bank account at their commercial banking arm. There may be strict rules about being late with payments. There may be no deferment options. You may have to. They may require that you hold a certain amount in cash in their bank account to account for you giving you such an interest rate. So there are usually a lot of bells and whistles that are attached with loan consolidation. So therefore, it's not for everyone. Another huge piece of this, and this is the part that we're going to talk more specifically about in just a couple slides, is that usually loan consolidation is only offered in the private markets. It's such, if you're on any type of loan forgiveness program, whether it be working in an underserved area, whether you be focused on a specific trade that has some social component to it, and then if you do that for a period of time, your federal loans get forgiven. If you consolidate that debt, that optionality goes away. Now we're going to talk more about this, but that is something to be mindful of. And again, you're going to hear me say this about 20 more times before the presentation is finished. Understanding the terms and what you are signing up for could not be more important. If you have a question, talk to someone, not just the representative at the lender. They may not even know all these options as well. They're not responsible at your new lender for understanding what your old lender was offering you. So it's critically important that you really know what you're signing up and what you could potentially be giving up if you do go, in fact, the consolidation route. But it can be a great way to change your burden administratively and from an interest rate perspective. This next strategy called Waterfall is not one that I recommend, but you're going to read a lot about it in the press, so I thought it should be best to address. The Waterfall method, whether it's credit cards or student debt, basically says that in order to ensure that you stay committed to the debt management process, that you pay loans down in full and then move on to the next loan, regardless of the interest rate. The idea behind this is more behavioral, that if you can actually see progress, you're more likely to stay committed to it as opposed to then just chipping away at a block of granite. The idea being if you go to the gym a couple days a week and you actually see pounds coming off on the scale, you're more likely to continue to go to the gym. That, from a behavioral standpoint, is true, but I really caution you if you take this approach that you will pay more in interest over time. Just that's math. There's no other way to debate that. So this is not our preferred method. However, if this works for you, and this will allow you to stay more committed and diligent about your debt management, then by all means, please feel free to use it. I still personally believe that this is not the best method, but if this actually provides you a level of commitment to the process, then by all means, it's better than nothing. So it's again not the preferred way to address it, but it's something that you can certainly do if you need that extra behavioral motivation along the way. How, just besides repaying your student debt, there are other ways that you can actually attack your debt burden. Recent legislation has made it possible for employers to now begin paying as an employee benefit student loan repayment, as this newest generation is saddled with more debt than any other generation combined. There are income-based payment plans, depending upon where you work and who you serve, you simply pay down your student debt as a percentage of your income. Again, this is a little bit of a slippery slope, because just because they allow you to pay less, it does not mean that the interest does not still compound, nor does it mean that any of the note is forgiven. They are simply just allowing you to pay less over time. What's the implication of that decision? That means you're going to be paying your loans longer. Again, it all comes down to understanding what you're signing up for, and also, as I mentioned at the beginning, what the total debt service is. If they're going to offer you to pay $100 a month as opposed to 200, well, that by definition means that you're going to have to take a longer period of time to pay down that note. So that approach is good for people in certain professions where income may be strapped. However, it's important for you to understand what the implication of that choice is and how much longer you'll need to service that debt as you work your way through those questions. Loan forgiveness. I mentioned that briefly. Whether you're in the public sector and whether you have federal student debt, there are a variety of options that allow you to forgive your note if you're a borrower in good standing over a period of years. It varies. I've seen anywhere from between 7 years up to 15 for work in the public sector, but there are risks that are significant with this approach, and we'll talk about those in just a second. And then principal prepayment. If you can find it in your monthly cash flow to contribute more dollars to your debt management process, that is quite simply the best way to do it. Even if it's just an extra $100 a month, the more you can stay ahead of it, you'll be surprised at how quickly you can chip away at those numbers over time. Okay, so here is the fly, the giant fly in the ointment. What you see on your screen here is headlines from various national publications and newspapers and media outlets about the current state of the federal loan forgiveness program. Several thousand, employees in the public sector, whether they be teachers, whether they be healthcare workers, were promised that if they were in good standing, if they made their payments on time for a period of years, the federal government would forgive their loans. This program has not worked out as planned. It was enacted under the Obama administration and was carried through to the Trump administration, who has shown from the Education Department very little appetite for ensuring that this gets done. As of now, less than 1% of forgiveness claims have been approved. So where's the caveat in this? Well, the big caveat is that if you have one of these particular jobs, they're mainly designed to have a lower salary component, but this being a key perk, if you will, to entice people to work in the public sector. You really need to understand what the math would be and the risk that you'd be taking if you have an opportunity to work, let's say, in the private sector for twice the amount of money. Is this as good of a perk as you actually think it is? Trusting the government to basically fulfill their promises has been a dicey proposition in this area, and a lot of people have left a lot of money on the table that they could have been making elsewhere in anticipation of having their debt wiped from the books, and that simply has not happened. So it's really important that if you're using this as a key driver in your decision making, that you do your research, you understand what you're signing up for, you understand what the government is responsible for. And then, even if you do all those things, there is a very good chance, as has been currently displayed, that you are not likely to actually get anywhere with this approach. Now, this is mainly a result of the change in administration, and this may change again if things change in November. The administration who is going to be administering this plan ultimately has the discretion to put as much focus on it as they desire. But again, that's for you. That's more of a personal decision. But the only advice that I would provide is do not make any assumption that when you try to take advantage of these types of breaks that are provided from federal loans, that it's guaranteed. As we have seen, that is certainly not the case, and this is just the most blatant example of it. Okay, so now we're going to shift a little bit, and we're going to talk about retirement savings and just general debt. The question that I get asked most often is, which is better? And that's not the question I want you to think. The question is, how can they work in conjunction with one another? We really want to understand how leverage or debt can make our lives better and not just as a default option. Things like buying a home, investing in your education really can enhance your life. They can enhance your income earning opportunities, and they provide shelter and housing and all the other benefits that is basically what people would refer to as good debt. So it's important to understand how those things impact your actual life as opposed to just the numbers behind them. You also want to understand what the future financial choices that you'll have to make. Every dollar of debt that you take from yourself now is a dollar that you don't earn later. Debt is not something that you can forget about. You are simply prepaying for something later in life. And it's always important to keep that in the back of your mind. When determining whether I should pay down debt or save money for my retirement, what you're really also asking yourself is which type of rate do I look to get? One hard and fast rule in financial planning is that credit card debt has no tangible value whatsoever. So if the debate becomes, do I pay down my credit card debt or do I invest in my retirement savings? The answer is always eliminating credit card debt. Interest rates in the 20s and 30s, depending on your credit score, offer no value, and you'll never ever be able to to maintain a consistent rate of return in investment markets to justify carrying credit card debt. Too often, we sit with clients all the time who even have cash on hand and still carry credit card balances. Again, there's not many hard and fast rule, and when you are in this line of work, you operate in 1% white, 1% black, and then 98% gray. Well, credit card debt is firmly in the camp of either white or black, depending upon your preferred color. It has no value. It is a detriment to wealth creation, and you'd be better served ensuring that you can eliminate that whenever possible. Another common question that I thought was important to address when we're covering this type of topic is the benefit of a debt-free retirement. The biggest risk that we see retirees that work with us at our firm that they have is when they're first entering retirement. It's when they're first leaving the job market, leaving their steady stream of income and beginning to draw on their lifetime of hard work and their lifetime savings. Those period of years is the biggest risk that they have to formulating a solid foundation as they go forward. There is a tremendous benefit to entering that phase of your life debt-free. The house is paid off, credit cards hopefully are not a consequence, and all their consumer debt is relatively modest. The ability for you as an individual or retiree to have choices at your disposal and to be able to live the life you want without the burden of a monthly mortgage check or other significant debt payment really does change the way that you can manage your money, and it changes the way that you can live. Not having to come up with that significant monthly sum allows you to, quote unquote, turn the spigot off in times of market unrest, in times of a global pandemic as we're living through right now, or in times of a poor return environment, whatever the case may be. By not having that nut that you have to come up with every month, it's really, really powerful. And I would encourage everyone as they're considering whether to put money towards their debt payment or their retirement savings. Obviously, it's always a mixture of both, and we would encourage both as you plan for your future. But there's also a tremendous benefit to entering retirement debt-free. It's a real winning hand, and it can really be something that can change the trajectory of your retirement years. Consumer debt. This presentation has been generally focused on student loans, but we want to also cover consumer debt in at least some small capacity. Healthy financial habits grow your net worth over time, while most people simply focus on the returns that they're getting from their investment portfolio. The growth of your balance sheet and the growth of your net worth can also be directly tied to how you manage your debt. So I can't emphasize that component enough for those who are listening, that the debt management piece of your financial life is just as important as the return on your assets. So how are people reactive, and what are they doing to not kind of fulfill their mission of growing their balance sheet and net worth over time? Not paying credit card balances in full. You'll hear me say this again in the presentation, but don't blame credit cards. It's not credit cards' fault. Credit cards are the vehicle that you buy stuff. You're the problem if you have a credit card debt issue. Now that's not something that that everyone has, and it's something that people can fix. But ensuring that you pay your balances in full again avoids you into the death spiral of massive credit card debt. Um, Accumulating too much interest-free debt, using quotes. Um, Jordan's Furniture is just the prime example for those in Massachusetts. Other type of quote unquote interest-free loans. Um, just because something is interest-free does not mean that you need to buy it. And that doesn't mean that it shouldn't count as debt that needs to be payable over time. While it's certainly preferable to anything with an interest rate attached to it, we oftentimes see a ballooning of interest-free debt, and usually that interest-free part is only for a portion of the loan term. It's a very good sales tactic, which is why it's employed so frequently, whether it's car dealerships or furniture companies being the most prevalent of the suspects. But always know that just because something is interest-free does not mean it's good, and you should always be mindful of how much of that type of debt you're accumulating. The total cost of purchases. A new ski jacket that costs $300 when paid on credit card that isn't paid in full every month actually costs significantly more than that. So really, and specifically for larger purchases, whether they be cars or whether they be home renovation projects, really understanding what the true cost is. The true cost is the purchase price plus your debt service, and it's important for everyone to know that. So how can you be proactive? This isn't all negative. There's certainly a way we can help address these things. Understanding what your budget is. Everyone knows what their big monthly expenses are, whether they be car payments, student loan payments, or mortgages, but other money tends to fall through the cracks. So understanding where it's all going is a critical step. Having liquidity on hand, specifically an emergency fund, whether it be for the loss of a job or just some unexpected expense. Your dog needs surgery. A tree falls on the roof. Your hot water heater blows up in your basement. All of those things happen unexpectedly by definition, and we want to be prepared for when they do, because that directly impacts the ability for us to manage that over a short period of time. This is something, and the last thing I want to talk about being proactive, minimizing kind of recurring subscriptions, Stitch Fix, magazines, gym memberships that we never use, cable channels that we never watch. If you were to, while each individual item seems rather small, usually they add up to hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month, not just on a yearly basis. That is significant savings that you could put towards family time, that you could put towards savings, that you could put towards vacation, that you could put just back in your pocket. So understanding what you're paying for, why you're paying for it, is critical to maintaining a healthy relationship with debt. And then these are just some general themes that I kind of want to leave you with. What financial benefit does debt provide? This somewhat addresses the question I was asking just a minute ago. Is it a mortgage, or is it a consumer good? A home provides memories. It provides a place to live. It's more than simply a consumer purchase. So thinking, plus there's always the possibility that you actually make some money when you go to sell your house. So understanding what the financial benefit would be when you go to get a college education, you're investing in yourself to increase your future earnings. These are all questions that are important, and that would be helpful for you to understand as you think about whether debt is the proper path for you. This next bullet is a little tongue in cheek, but a quick side story. I got this idea of investing in your own happiness from someone I met on a chairlift at a ski resort, who was wearing a brand new pair of beautiful downhill skis, and I said I knew this person a little bit, and knew that what skis cost, and I just said, oh, did you get a new pair? He's like, yeah, I really couldn't afford it, but I'm investing in my own happiness. And while that's great, and we want to ensure that we're all doing the things that make us happy, that phrase, that line of thinking, well, I'm only doing this once, so I just went for it. That's okay if you act that way with some restraint. People use that as justification for accumulating massive and massive amounts of debt. And our recommendation from a financial planning perspective would be to understand what you can actually afford, and then make the conscious decision within those bounds to invest in your own happiness. Investing in your own happiness with debt provides a a trap later on that needs to be rectified. So be very just mindful of that. Um, Investing in the unknowable. So just not understanding where your money is going and what it's going for. Specifically as it relates to student debt, not understanding you're spending $80,000 a year to go to Northeastern, but you really don't understand what that degree is going to get you besides a piece of paper. You don't know what career you're going to have. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know where you're going to work. Now, we don't need to have all those answers set forth right at the beginning, but you do have to have some plan as you make those financial decisions, because of the way college and universities are structured now. This is like buying a home for someone who's at the end of their college years is 22 or 23. It's such a significant financial outlay that you really have to understand what you're getting back from this before you make that decision. And I mentioned this earlier. It's not the credit card; it's you. Credit cards are just vehicles for you to buy stuff. They can be great tools, and they can be great and they're needed in today's society. But you need to understand your relationship with the credit card. If you cannot manage that yourself, then they shouldn't be something that you utilize frequently. So just remember, don't blame the credit card. It's you. You're the person putting it into the machine. So we actually got a couple of questions that I saw pop through when I was doing this. So I'm just going to take a quick pause, and then I'll just go through these quickly. So thank you for everyone who submitted them. So this comes from Dan, who said, "What's the best way to avoid credit card debt traps?" So that's more of a behavioral question. I would directly point you to having a better grasp of your monthly cash flow, because that is going to be the biggest determination to allow you to project whether or not you can service that debt over time. Credit cards in and of themselves have absolutely no value in terms of a carried balance, and it is the worst thing you can do from a wealth creation standpoint. Credit cards will destroy your wealth quicker than any other mechanism. So I strongly encourage people to have a proper understanding of what they can service on a monthly basis and ensure that those balances are paid off. It really comes down to understanding exactly what the total cost of that purchase will be, and understanding how long it will take for that balance to go away. Okay, so the next question: does it make sense to refinance my mortgage? It does, and this is somewhat of a separate topic, but it's a great question. So refinancing your mortgage does make sense, but there is a couple of caveats that I want you to be aware of. Closing costs. What are the other expenses that you need to actually secure that new mortgage? Those are critically important, because whatever you may be saving on a monthly basis may be eroded significantly by the upfront cash that'll be needed. The other thing, and probably more important, that I want to address that I see happen all the time, is people who refinance their mortgage, but it increase the amount of loan years. So if you're 10 years into a mortgage, you refinance to another 30-year fixed, you've now eroded 10 years of equity that you built up, and have now increased and pushed out your timeline to becoming debt free even further. Sometimes that's a necessary evil to get a better rate, I understand, but you should really be mindful of when your debt will be kind of ending, because if you are near retirement or in retirement, it may be important to avoid having that payment on a monthly basis. It just creates a tremendous amount of freedom to be able to control your spending to a greater degree in the event that you run into poor investment markets or some other situation outside of your control. It's really, really critical, in my view, for a stress-free retirement to not have those payments looming over your head, especially if you're only drawing on a portfolio and have no other access to guaranteed income. Let's see, what do we have? So should I prepay my mortgage? I think prepaying your mortgage is a great idea, but it's important for you to understand and to know what the terms are that would allow you to actually do that, and then what is the opportunity cost of actually putting through your prepayment of a mortgage. If you're prepaying a mortgage of 3% and you have been returning at an average of 5% in your investment portfolio, well, then your money would be better spent being invested than being put to prepayment. But that's really more a question that you have to ask yourself about what's your risk tolerance, what are you comfortable with doing. But the questions that I want you to ask is, if I prepay my mortgage, I'm making a conscious choice of putting money towards this specific item. What other things are impacted by that choice? And as long as you ask those questions and understand what the consequences of that are, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The other thing I would say is, as you go through and project out what amount you're looking to prepay your mortgage by, it's important to get an updated illustration to see exactly what the impact of that would be. What I don't want people to do is have an extra $100 laying around and put it towards a 30-year fixed mortgage. That's not going to really do anything to the total cost of you servicing that debt over time. And that $100 would be much better off being put into a rainy day fund or some type of emergency fund in the event that you may need it later. $100 on a 30-year mortgage doesn't do anything. So I want you to be a little bit more intentional. If you're going to prepay the mortgage, doing so on a recurring basis is probably a much better option, and being diligent about that is a great way to go about it. So if your mortgage is $2,500 a month, if you pay $3,000, that's a great way. That's a significant chunk that you could be paying as you put more dollars to that loan service. But again, understanding what the other opportunities may exist is critically important before you make that decision. And then lastly, it says, I'm close to retirement. How should my debt management strategies change? I've talked a little bit about this previously. I think it's really important as you get closer to retirement to really, be diligent about eliminating any debts that can be actually eliminated. Obviously, from a credit card perspective, at no point in life should you ever carry a balance unnecessarily. But as you enter retirement, the very first couple of years is really the times that you're most exposed. So having the freedom to not be obligated to come up with money in times that are not advantageous to you is really, really powerful. It allows you to have a certain burden lifted off your shoulders, knowing that you don't have to come up with this payment on a monthly basis, and it gives you greater freedom to kind of live the life that you want without being glued or stuck to a specific schedule. It also can really adversely impact your finances. If you have to, let's just say in a 2007 or first quarter of this year, if you have to draw on a portfolio that has been significantly impacted by poor market performance, that could really hinder your ability to sustain your lifestyle in retirement. If you're debt free, that's one burden that that you can avoid. So I would strongly encourage anyone who's entering retirement to really consider eliminating as much debt as possible, because I think it provides a greater level of freedom as you enter those retirement years. So that's all the questions that we got. Let me just see if there's any more here. Okay. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. So that's it for today. If anyone does have any questions, my office phone and my email are right there. Please feel free to call or email anytime. I'm happy to discuss anything further. And then I'll also be happy to set up any private appointments for anyone who's interested in kind of learning a little bit more. So I hope you found this to be helpful. I really enjoyed having you all with us today. And then I look forward to our July webinar. And I don't know the exact topic, but I will double check that, and I'll make sure that we get that out to everyone who attended. So when we see them in July. I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all soon. Thanks so much.